I felt in that moment like I was being rejected, and in a very public way. And when we do feel a sense of belonging, we are healthier, we are much more collaborative, we perform better, we're more productive, right? And we're kinder. In a company of 10,000 people, that translates into $10 million savings a year. So it makes me a bit emotional because we lose so much when we're fighting against something, one, that is natural. Zach would always say, she's smart, she's brilliant, she's the best. And that made me feel good, confident, motivated, right? A lot of people are in pain.
Do you remember the time where you felt you didn't belong? It's tough, right? Join me today for an emotionally charged and deep conversation with Abam Mambo about belonging. Abam, I'm so happy having you here to talk about such an important topic, such as belonging. So welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here, Rodrigo. Thank you for having me.
All right. I think a good place to start is maybe to understand one of your personal experiences. So do you have any personal story where you felt excluded or that you didn't belong?
Yes, I think like almost everyone, right? I've had instances where I didn't feel like I belonged. But there's one in particular that stands out to me, which is a few years ago, I inherited a new team and I had just moved to Singapore. And I think about 2 weeks into that role, someone came to me and said, is so-and-so person on your team? The announcement, of course, had gone out about me, my new role, and my new team. So I thought it was a strange question. And they said, well, this person was in the pantry, and someone asked them, is Abam your new boss? And the person responded, no, she's not. And when I first heard that, my reaction was, why? This is my direct report. We've met, we've had a one-on-one, there's no confusion. And then after that, it kind of sank in that was about something else. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't about confusion. And I felt in that moment like I was being rejected, and in a very public way. And that just, that stands out in my mind as one of those moments where I just felt like, woof, you're not wanted here.
Can you tell us how did you feel in that situation?
Surprise first, and then just sadness. And like I didn't belong. It felt like here I had worked really hard all my life. I was ambitious. I had achieved this role. And I felt like that statement was just an erasure. It was saying, for whatever reason, no, you're not good enough to be my manager. And for me, it was belittling. It was hurtful. But it was also a great lesson in self-belonging, because it made me remember who I was, how I got there, and why I was there. And without those things, I don't think I'd have got past it, because there's some other things that happened later on. But I think from that first comment, I just told myself, you know who you are, you know how you got here, you know why you're here, so you're gonna have to just pull it together.
If there's someone that are going through a similar situation, they are part of a community, but they are excluded, they don't feel they belong, what do you think they can do?
Rodrigo, I mean, I think it's a very tough thing, right? We crave as human beings this sense of community and belonging. So if you feel that you're not part of a community or you're being rejected, the first thing I'll say is it's really important to have a sense of self-belonging. We talk about belonging a bit in a vacuum and a bit in an organizational sense sometimes, but it starts with the person. If you know who you are, if you know what you're about, if you know where you came from, that is the foundation, right? Because once you know who you are, you have that strong sense of self-belonging, then you can reach out and find your tribe. It's hard to find people who accept you if you don't know who you are or what you're looking for or what you need. So I'd say those two things. First, have a good sense of self-belonging, and secondly, find your tribe.
I really like that. So maybe now it's good to understand how did you start working with belonging?
I've always been fascinated with people and a sense of community. I'm Cameroonian by birth, and I grew up in a very communal environment. And early on in my journey, I had some childhood challenges where I didn't always feel like I belonged. But along my journey as an immigrant from the US, from Cameroon to the US, and then during my career from the US to South Africa and in Singapore, I always felt this sense of outsiderness, right? Whether it's because I was a woman or black or a foreigner or whatever. And so I came to belonging from a place of, how do we get an outsider to connect? How do I make other people not feel the way I felt all those moments when I was an outsider? And so in the wake of the pandemic and post-George Floyd, as everybody was talking about diversity and inclusion, I was thinking, there is more to this than just D&I. There's belonging. And so I began working at that point on belonging and how we make people feel like they're seen, they're heard, they're valued, they're respected.
And how do you describe belonging, and what's the difference or the connection between belonging and the diversity and inclusion?
Belonging for me foremost is a feeling. We've been told for a long time that feelings don't belong in the workplace, which I think is mad. And when we think about it, if we're emotional creatures, right, as human beings, and that we crave belonging, when you and I step into the workplace, our need for belonging doesn't stop, right? So that I define belonging as that human need to be seen, to be heard, to be valued, to be respected, and to connect. And I think the difference between belonging and diversity and inclusion is diversity is very much about our differences, a celebration of our differences. And it's an objective criteria. Inclusion, it can be about a feeling. It's mostly about behaviors. Belonging, to me, is the outcome. When we bring a diverse group together and we engage in inclusive behaviors, what's possible is belonging. So that's how I see the relation between those three things.
And if we look at organizations, what are the benefits for an organization to focus on belonging?
I think about that question in terms of what I call the belonging imperatives. And there are three of them I think about. The first one, Rodrigo, is what I call the human imperative, which of course social psychologists like Abraham Maslow have talked about. In a human hierarchy of needs, we have a need for love and belonging. And so when people ask why workplace belonging, the first thing is it's innate. We as human beings have that need to belong. And when we do feel a sense of belonging, we are healthier, we are much more collaborative, we perform better, we're more productive, right? And we're kinder. Research from Qualtrics shows that there's a 91% correlation between a sense of belonging and engagement. So I think just that human need to connect is critical because it makes us better humans. The second belonging imperative is the timing imperative, which has to do with how much time we spend at work. You know, there's a study done in the United Kingdom which said in a lifespan of 79 years, most of us will spend 30 to 35% of our lives in the workplace. The only thing we'll do more than work is sleep. When I think about that, I think of it in terms of, if I'm going to spend more time with colleagues than with the friends I love and my family and my kids, isn't it incumbent upon me and my colleagues to make the workplace the healthiest, safest, happiest place besides home, right? The third thing is the success imperative. What research has shown is employees who have a sense of belonging perform 56 times better. It's 7% more productive. And for companies, what that translates into is 50% retention. Rough dollars and cents, in a company of 10,000 people, that translates into $10 million savings a year. So across all three, we're talking happier employees, more engaged, and the company just does better from a business perspective.
Wow, those stats are very, very powerful. So, but why do you think companies are struggling with belonging?
Foremost, I think it's because I said at the beginning that we think of belonging as a feeling, which it is. And we've long been told feelings don't belong in the workplace. So I think for a long time we haven't connected those dots, right? And in the wake of the pandemic, in the aftermath, where people have been feeling lonely and isolated, we're now looking at how do we create human-centric organizations? How do we bring the human back to the center of work? And very naturally then, belonging has a place. So I think a lot of companies are now kind of coming up to that idea. The question for them is, how do we create that sense of belonging? But I think the reason why it's been outside of the workplace for so long is because we made the mistake of separating work and life, right? We talk about work-life balance as if work exists outside of life. So I think those are the two reasons. One is just, we thought they were two separate things. And now that we see the value in it, I think companies are trying to figure out how do we create a culture of belonging, which is why I do the work that I do.
So this is a great segue for the next question, which is so as a company, how can I create a sense of belonging in my organization?
It starts with leadership. It starts with leaders who understand the need to have a high belonging quotient, right? And this is a term I coined, which refers to our individual or communal willingness, ability, commitment, and action plan to create a space where people feel like they can be themselves foremost, where they can feel valued, seen, respected. If our leaders in an organization prioritize belonging in the same way that we do IQ and EQ, that makes more rounded leaders, which makes for a more rounded workplace. I think the starting point is really helping leaders understand we don't leave our need for belonging at home. And so when we come into the workplace, what do we need to feel like a community? What do we feel we need to motivate us? I think that's the beginning. And when leaders lead, the rest of us follow.
What is very interesting about what you said is that It is true that after the COVID-19, a lot of people were thinking like, okay, now people are just working from home, and this is gonna stay. But it is true that we see a trend that more and more people also want to come back to work, and I think it's connected with that need for connection, for belonging. But my point now is that's where I see a lot of companies struggling is. If I have a hybrid work environment,
Yes.
Then how can I build a sense of belonging when people, for example, are working from home?
First things first, I think I was asked this question once by leaders, who were grappling with return to work. And they didn't know what the competition was. And I said, listen, your competitor is not the other employer. It's home. For 2 to 2.5 years, most of us had worked from home and gotten comfortable with being there. So if you want people to come back to the workplace, you have to be attuned to who your competitor is. And if it's home, how can you make the workplace feel a little bit more like home, right? So I think that's the starting point. It's really understanding what you're up against. And when I say home, what do I mean? People are comfortable at home. People can be their authentic selves at home. People have flexibility at home, right? So that has to undergird any kind of return to work program employers have. Now, how do you get there? You get there first of all by talking to your employees. People want different things, right? So what we've seen in the research is singles or empty nesters want to go back to work at a faster rate or higher rate than working parents. So you have to talk to your employees to figure out what works for whom, and you have to be flexible to accommodate that. The other thing that's really important, I think, is giving people a reason to come back to work. While there is a need to come back and connect, I've seen employers who say, come to work 3 days out of 5 or 2 days out of 5, but pick your own day. Well, if people are coming back to work, Rodrigo, for community, you can't just say pick Monday and I pick Tuesday and you pick Wednesday, right? Find activities that give people an opportunity to connect while they're there. If it's on Monday that we're coming for a team meeting, I know I'm going to see you. We're going to have that connection. We're going to have that opportunity to brainstorm and build something together. So I think we get there again by understanding what the employees' unique needs are, and then galvanizing them around activities that give them a chance to interact with each other and to feel that sense of community.
Yeah, I like that. And in the time that you've been working like with leaders, what really breaks your heart when you see what's happening at the workplace?
A few things, but I think in the last few years, the pushback against diversity in some quarters has been the thing that has broken my heart the most. Sorry, this makes me a bit emotional because we lose so much when we're fighting against something, one, that is natural, right? Diversity is an idea that HR introduced. Diversity is inherent. So the hardest thing for me has been leaders who don't understand it, reject it, or want a business case for diversity. How do you create a business case for something that is organic and human? So that really breaks my heart. And the second thing I would say is, we're a species that has managed to put a man on the moon. You were talking about ChatGPT earlier before we started recording, right? We've made these leaps in technology, and yet we haven't figured out how to absorb more people into the workforce. And that breaks my heart because I know we can do this. Specifically, we have technology that allows more people with disabilities to be in the workplace, more working moms or more stay-at-home moms to work, right? And until COVID came, we hadn't leveraged those technologies. So that breaks my heart, to not see us tap into a human ingenuity to advance those among us who have some challenges and some difficulties with getting to the workplace.
And what do you think leaders can do in order to not to go in that direction, or to build a really organization which is inclusive and diverse and where people feel they belong?
I think the first thing is to remember that people who belong stay long. And what I ask leaders looking at this is to say, when did you feel excluded? Go back to that time when we perhaps denied entrance to a school, or quite simply, how kids on the playground are picking people for teams. When you were not the kid who got picked, how did you feel? And if that moment didn't bring out the best in you, think about how it's affecting your people, right? So that's the first thing I would say is leaders need to get into that heart space and think, what did I feel when I was excluded? And if that didn't bring out the best in me, how can I change that so it brings out the best in my people? And the second thing I would say is it takes vision, right? Leaders have to be able to see beyond the pale. Years ago, women belonged in the kitchen, we were told. It took visionary leaders to say, no, it isn't so. Martin Luther King Jr. talked about having a dream. All those steps were critical in transforming the workplace. And I think visionary leaders, and I don't think it's limited to just really smart people. Every single one of us can be visionary. But I think what it takes is looking around us and saying, what problems need to be solved? Who can solve that problem? And what barriers do I need to put down to allow those people to solve this problem? I think if we can do those two things, the relatability piece and the visionary piece, we can get a long way on the belonging curve.
Yeah, that's very powerful. Yeah. So I started the conversation asking you about an experience where you felt you didn't belong, but I would love to end the conversation asking you for an experience where you felt you belonged, and why was it meaningful for you?
I love this question. I felt belongingness a lot of times at work. This is just one example of that. When I started in my first company, I had a leader who, I was 4 years out of law school, okay? So I wasn't super experienced. And my client was the biggest business unit in the company. So of course, I didn't feel very confident. I wasn't sure that I was giving the right advice. But you know what he did, Rodrigo? Before I entered any room with leadership team members, he'd gone ahead of me and he'd said, she's the best thing since sliced bread. She's the smartest hire we've ever made. She's brilliant, you can trust her. So before I entered any room, he'd rolled out the red carpet for me. And the question marks we usually have around new hires, right? I didn't have to deal with any of those things because I had a leader who made people feel like I belonged in that space. Now think about the first question you asked me and the contrast here. Leaders underestimate the power of rolling out the red carpet, the confidence it builds in individuals, and the sense of belonging it creates. So for me, that incident, and it happened many times, right? Zach would always say, she's smart, she's brilliant, she's the best. And that made me feel good, confident, motivated, right? And there was nothing I wouldn't do for those clients because they embraced me wholeheartedly. So I think that is one of the times when I felt a really strong sense of belonging, and it shaped my leadership. It shaped how I parent, quite frankly, and it shaped a lot of the work I do around the Belonging Quotient.
Wow, that's such an incredible example. And I think also it shows us that for belonging, it's the little things that has a more impact in other people. Yeah. And when we are aware about those things, as you said, like how do I feel when I belong? So if I help my team with the same, they're going to feel they belong, they're going to be more engaged, and of course the organization is going to make more money.
Yes.
So good.
And if I can encapsulate that in one word, it's welcome. Right?
Yeah.
If people feel welcome in your home, in your community, in your workplace, that is belonging.
Wow, so good. So now we are almost at the end, but before I would like to ask you about, maybe there's a question that no one has asked you before and you would love to answer. What would be that question?
How can I help? That's the question. I think a lot of people want to understand the concept behind belonging. Not everyone asks, how can I help? And I chose that question, Rodrigo, because a lot of people are in pain. Post-pandemic, a lot of people, we saw a spike in mental health crises. We've seen a lot of people who are just suffering, are feeling like outsiders. And I want more people to ask me about how can I help to foster human-centric cultures, not just at work, at school, in our communities, in our churches, our places of worship, our hospitals. How can we get people to feel safe enough to speak up? How can we get people safe enough to be their best, to bring their best, and to contribute their best? That's the question I don't always get asked that I would like to hear more. Because every single one of us has a role to play in building communities where people can truly belong and where we can go back to the business of being human.
Wow. Such a great way to end our conversation. But before, I would just like to tell you, first to thank you for being open and also vulnerable about sharing your experience. But also for me, what is more important and what I admire is how you are using also your experiences in order to champion belonging, so that more organizations, they are more human-centric. So I'm really happy that we shed light on this important topic. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.